You've mentioned the Burger King campaign a couple times, and I put together a series of questions around that. But maybe my first question is, a lot of groups at the time focused on like federal legislation or state legislation or the World Bank, but why did y'all decide to target corporations, which is very much in Rand's DNA at this point, versus other groups?
It was a conscious choice, a, not to focus on say federal legislation and policy for a couple of reasons. Uh, at our 3-day strategy conference, which was just north of the Golden Gate Bridge out at Cronkite Beach in the Marin Headlands, um, you know, that's where our event happened. The groups there wanted me to locate Rainforest Action Network in Washington, D.C., several of them. And I thought, well, it doesn't have to be in San Francisco or the Bay Area, but if you're doing international environmental work, at that time, Boston was a possibility. New York City certainly was, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, in terms of the United States. But I also thought about, maybe Flagstaff, Arizona, because I was missing my time with the Hopi and the Pueblo tribes down there, but I stayed in San Francisco. But also that's in the era of Jimmy Carter lost his bid for a second term. And that's really when we probably lost the chance to save the earth that we know and love, because it came with 12 years of Reagan and Bush Sr. And we just knew the Reagan administration was not going to be an ally to save the rainforest. And so other groups were focused on that. Our added punch didn't feel to me like it was going to make much of a difference. And so Rosella and I decided to take on corporations. Catherine Caulfield was part of the founding bunch, and she had just written the book In the Rainforest, which was sort of a Bible at the day and still remains, I think, the best introductory book to the issue. And she didn't think we should focus on rainforest beef because the tropical timber campaign, she was part of the architect of that in Europe because she had lived over there. But Rosella and I overruled that and launched the Burger King boycott. It took us about 18 months to get them on one bended knee. And then they finally canceled a $35 million beef contract with Costa Rica, which is where they got the bulk of their frozen beef from the rainforest.
And in the Burger King campaign, there's an interesting, I don't know if you've seen this, there's an interesting write-up about the Burger King campaign and the nonviolent action database at Swarthmore, which talks in a lot of detail about it. And it seems like Rand worked a lot with like groups like Earth First and PETA. And so it was like in some ways, and I also like, seems like in some ways Rand plays as a bridge between different movements and groups, and then also like a bridge with the communities in the rainforest, and kind of bringing those issues and campaigns to the U.S. And I'm wondering how some of that kind of played out, how it led to that.
Yeah, I haven't read that write up. There wasn't any close relationship with PETA at the time. I wanted to and would have liked that to happen, but I don't really recall that being fundamental to any of the really early work. But again, groups like World Wildlife Fund had field offices in rainforest countries. We made a conscious choice not to do that. And our rhetoric at the time was there's two things you need to do to save the rainforest: get your foot off their throat and support the allies in those places. And that became our approach. So when other groups were setting up things like protect an acre or buy an acre of rainforest, adopt an acre or buy an acre of rainforest, we set up one called protect an acre, not adopt an acre or buy an acre. And so by protect an acre, it was, support the allies down there, particularly indigenous groups, to do the work they needed to do in their own homelands. Right. So that we just had that philosophical difference of approach. And but we were, a network, and it was a loose affiliation. We had also started the RAGs, the Rainforest Action Groups, which were directly affiliated to Rainforest Action Network. And at one point, we had about 150 RAGs around the world, but for the most part in southern Canada and the United States. But there was a London RAG, there was a Melbourne RAG, there were, various Rainforest Action Groups. And so we were looking for anybody and everybody that we could pull in to this collective effort. And we did, a lot of circuit riding and lectures at conferences and on college campuses. And we, put together this Rainforest Action Group approach where anybody who had the guts and gumption could set up their own Rainforest Action Group and spin off as they wanted to. Rainforest Alliance in New York City, which probably has triple the budget of Rainforest Action Network in San Francisco, originally wanted to be the New York City office of Rainforest Action Network, right? And I told Dan Katz, I said, look, this is a big issue, and we're not territorial here. The world needs more groups. You could just set up your own group and run it, which he did. And to this day, I think he's still chair of the board of Rainforest Alliance. They took a different approach around certification, but again, we needed that multifaceted approach. Some groups were going to do policy work in the US, other groups were going to focus on the multilateral development banks, like the Inter-American Development Bank and the African Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. And other groups were going to do the civil disobedience, particularly around corporations, though we also were happy to do civil disobedience with the WTO and the World Bank and the IMF and those aspects of the evil empire.
I should have said this when I brought up Burger King. Is the very first protest I ever went to in college was a Burger King, Save the Rainforest in the late 80s in Boone, North Carolina.
We would typically do the Burger King protests at lunchtime, of course, right? That's when the trafficking is coming in, and there were a lot less drive-throughs then. People went in and out. And so we did a lot of street theater, as Scott knows, where we would have a life-size papier-mâché cow, and two people were inside of it, right? And one was the front legs and the head, so to speak, and the other one, the back legs and the tail end. And we'd have somebody with a basket of leaves in front of them, handing leaves, and you would reach to the mouth of the cow, pull the leaves in. That was eating the rainforest. And the person who was the rear legs had this little basket inside of styrofoam containers, that you put your Whopper burgers in, and would shove them out the hind end of the cow. Well, if that's parading back and forth of the people were happy to go across the street to Wendy's or some other place, and we did that across the country. But the most of we were people in college campuses and a lot of Earth First activists. We didn't originally have our own grassroots network. And so Earth First was the original grassroots network of Rainforest Action Network. And there was great camaraderie there. There was also building camaraderie with all of those other NGOs, NRDC and EDF and National Wildlife Federation and such. And eventually even Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund and Nature Conservancy International, we had pretty good relationships with. From time to time, I wanted to launch campaigns against World Wildlife Fund when they'd take a stupid ass policy in South America, or Conservation International when they would sort of declare some silver bullet solution like debt for nature swaps that cut the deals on indigenous lands without consulting indigenous peoples. But that aside, there was a lot of camaraderie building. And one of the things that we did well at the advice of Herb Gunther at Public Media Center was we did a press kit. In the old days when it wasn't just electronic, and who's ever seen an electronic press kit, but these press kits were physical and they were shingled. So like a pocket folder, you open it up, and one of the headlines on the inside it were contacts. And we said, well, if you need to talk to anthropologists about the rainforest, here, four really great people from these different organizations, including Cultural Survival at Harvard University and Survival International in the UK, right? Or if you need to talk about a river expert around hydroelectric dams, here's the experts on that, Phil Williams from the International Rivers Network and people like that. And we got that press kit out extensively to the press and also to the funders. It was a good fundraising tool, but it was very ecumenical. And so Rainforest Action Network was ecumenical from day one, and was really looking to help build a movement and popularize that issue, and also, of course, to launch campaigns directly against the transnational corporations as part of our approach.
Now, this was before, like global warming, climate change became a huge issue. So how were you kind of approaching it? How were you convincing people that not buying a hamburger was going to help the environment? How could you convince them that something that was happening far away in the rainforest was really important to their lives?
Yeah, well, I think we always had we need a healthy planet approach. And we never wanted to, kind of say shut down the timber industry and tropical rainforests and have it shoved off to Siberia or the boreal forests of Canada. And so we even encouraged groups in British Columbia to connect to the rainforest tag that we had so popularized and have temperate rainforest groups. And so the Great Bear Campaign and groups like Stand, came out of that effort. And so,